There are things that we experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in a corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us, share your story, share your evidence, because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is Minnesota GhostBox Radio.
And this is Minnesota GhostBox live streaming on ParaX Radio, and we're available on the After Hours AM feed on iHeartRadio. Coming to you live from, what a great day, St. Michael, Minnesota. Welcome. How is everyone doing tonight? Why is it a great day? Well, you know what? It just is. And we've had some really good things happening with Minnesota GhostBox that we cannot wait to share with everybody else. And I don't know if you had a chance to listen or not, but I was very fortunate to be a co-host on After Hours AM a couple weeks ago with Joel Sturgis, and we had a true crime night, and then we also had paranormal night, and that was a lot of fun. But there's just a lot of good things happening, and I'm very fortunate for it. I'll tell you what else I'm really excited about and why this is a great day. I have been trying to get Robert Murch to be on my show for probably, I'd say a couple of years. And the reason why I say that, he may not know that I've actually been trying to. I've heard him on a couple of shows, and I immediately thought, I really want to talk to him. There's a lot of things I have to ask him about. And finally tonight, I'm going to have that opportunity. Robert Murch, or we just want to call him Murch, is the world's foremost collector, historian, and expert on Ouija boards and talking boards, and serves as the chairman of the board for the Talking Board Historical Society, which he founded. His bizarre relationship with Ouija board began after watching Kevin Tenney's Witchboard in 1986, a century after the talking boards made its debut. Murch showcases his research and knowledge on his websites, robertmurch.com and williamfuld.com, that's F-U-L-D. Murch is a returning guest on Coast to Coast AM and an accomplished international lecturer speaking at museums and conferences around the world. He was named guest curator at the Baltimore Museum of Industry's groundbreaking Ouija exhibit, Let the Spirit Move You, often collaborates with the Strong, the National Museum of Play, and through the Talking Board Historical Society, organized by OuijaCon 2015, which celebrated Ouija's 125th anniversary with the city of Baltimore. Murch, welcome to Minnesota GhostBox.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so sorry it's taken so long to get me here. But I'm all yours.
The best part is you're like, I had no idea you even tried, which is probably...
It's been so busy. So it's funny. Some of your guests, they might know this about me. For anyone who cares to pay attention, but almost 2 years ago, I had back surgery, which really destroyed my kind of going to conventions and speaking at conventions. And so my work really turned to basically consulting on TV shows and movies and things that I didn't have to travel as much for, and could kind of do Skype and remote. And so the last 2 years, my whole world kind of turned into something totally different. And now I'm kind of making my way back to doing all this fun stuff. So I'm really happy to be here. And so it's not your fault. It's totally me.
Well, and I am so stoked, and you and I were talking beforehand, and I'm really excited about this. Before we go any further, I'd like to invite all of our listeners to join into the conversation, and you can do so by visiting our chat room. It is located at www.para-x.com, and on the main page, it very clearly says, listen now with live chat and join in. And the reason why I really want to make that clear is because I think there's a lot of questions about Ouija boards, and I feel like that this is a great opportunity. If by chance you haven't heard of Murch's background and what he brings to the table when it comes to these, I think that you are going to be very well educated as long as I ask the right questions. And if you have questions, I'd really like to hear them, because this is going to be very exciting. And I guess, Murch, the first question I have to ask, as somebody who knows Ouija boards are pretty well accessible, what is your take on the fact that you can pretty much go to a store and pick one up?
It's a real question that I get asked an awful lot, And so just to tell everybody, Ouija boards were started being sold and manufactured. Ouija, the brand that's currently owned by Hasbro, has been continuously sold in toy stores since 1890. So it's not a new thing. It's nothing, people say today, oh, how can they be sold in toy stores? They always have been. And the reason why is because Ouija is a talking board. There are many different talking boards. Ouija is just the most popular and the one that's kind of one. It is, people mostly call other talking boards Ouija boards. So the way Ouija was marketed was not necessarily as niche as spiritualists had been using talking boards. So talking boards come out of the spiritualist movement, and they creep out of the spiritualist movement into regular mainstream pop culture in 1886. And then suddenly everyone's doing them, and Ouija is kind of born and named in 1890 and manufactured in Baltimore. And the brilliance of Ouija was they didn't tell you why it worked. In fact, the very first advertisements would say, we don't claim to understand how or why Ouija works, but with your patience, it will exceed your greatest expectations. So they would say, ask it about the past, the present, the future. They didn't tell you and kind of box it in, unlike other talking boards that had been made previously or that have come after that tell you what you're talking to. So Ouija was really marketed to everybody, as opposed to just true believers and people who are wanting to part the veil.
Mm-hmm. And so the thing that I find very interesting, and by no means do I have really hardly any good knowledge on this. So, the idea that, up until I've started to research you, the idea of a talking board, I'm assuming the talking board had been around for much longer than a Ouija board.
Yeah, not really.
Okay.
And yes,
okay.
So it's kind of an ish answer. Ouija boards or talking boards that look and act almost exactly the way that we see Ouija boards today, that really comes out of 1886. But the spiritualist movement, comes on the scene in 1848 in New York. And so really close, they were using lots of different devices. So from 1848 to 1886, they were really close to the talking board. And there are many different devices. And in fact, a good friend of mine is Brandon Hodge from MysteriousPlanchette.com, and he really focuses on all of those other devices. Mm-hmm. And they were really close. But people like to think that the Ouija board is ancient and has ancient roots. And there are a few reasons why. Some of them say it in the movies, like in Witchboard. They talk about that they were using Ouija boards around the time of Pythagoras. And it's actually just not true. It's not true at all. The idea of a talking board, which is a piece of paper or a board that has letters and numbers on it, yes and no, goodbye, with a movable table that you touch and slides across, that's really an 1886 type invention. There were other things, like the Fox sisters, who start modern spiritualism. They were hearing raps and knocks, and they were asking questions, right? And yes or no, there would be a knock. Well, real quickly, they figured out that this is tough. So they laid out alphabet cards and then would use their finger or a pencil to point to the letter. And when they got to the correct letter, they would hear a knock. So they were really close almost right away. But it took until 1886 until they kind of merged the previous planchette, which is the movable piece today. People think the planchette is just part of the Ouija board, but the planchette has its own great history, starting in about 1853 all on its own. And it was an automatic or spirit writer, where it would be a heart-shaped device. You would place your hand on it. It would have two casters and rollers wheels on the bottom, and then at the point, instead of a big hole, it would just be a pencil hole. And you would place your hands on it, ask a question, and the spirits would through you write the answers. And eventually, spiritualists started to figure out that, they could either put a pointer on it or turn the pencil upside down and use that with alphabet cards. And so we're almost there. And then in 1886, this idea leaks out of the spiritualist movement and becomes something everyone can make at home. And that's really the article that it really gets exploded out of Ohio, where this all really starts. it gets reprinted all over the world. And so the talking board is considered the new planchette. And again, it's not until Ouija where someone markets it in a real mass-marketed way. And the success of Ouija is timing and its story, how the Ouija board got its name, who is around, who are those people, and again, not marketing it towards just talking to spirits was what was brilliant. That allowed it to be marketed to anyone. So suddenly, this idea of having a seance is in everyone's living room. You don't have to pay a medium. You don't have to go somewhere else. Everyone can do this.
So where does that name Ouija come from?
So for a long time, and for most of my life, we believed that the Ouija board was the combination of two words, French and German, oui and ja. So people would always say that. But the truth is, I came across a bunch of letters working with the Baltimore Sun. The Ouija board was first manufactured and named in Baltimore. And I was going through their archives and found these letters in 1919, kind of 30 years after the fact, of the originators all writing into the editor telling their story. And the one thing they all agree on is how the Ouija board got its name. And so there was Elijah Bond, who was the guy who kind of patents the board. There's Charles Kennard, who's the guy who claims to invent it. And then there is Elijah Bond's sister-in-law, Helen Peters, who he calls, a strong medium. And they're at the board, and they decide one night, we're making these boards. We don't have a name. What do you want to be called? And the board spells out OuiJA. And when they ask, what does that mean? The board answers, good luck. And so Ouija, the Egyptian luck board, was born. And what's kind of really neat about it is Helen was wearing a locket. And so right after the session, Helen pulls open this locket, and there's a figure of a woman on it, probably a cameo, with the word, they say, Ouija over the top of it. And Charles Kennard, who started his kind of psychical research in 1876, he really understands that it may not be spirits you're talking to. Like, it may not be the same thing every time. He gets psychology. So he asks Helen if she's thinking about this when they were using the board. And she said, no, absolutely not. Now, what's hard about this story is the word Ouija really doesn't exist until this night. So whether there was a misspelling or how that word was on her locket, we don't know. But, after I found that letter, I had to figure out who she was, track her through history, follow her from moving to London to Denver, where I live, where she's buried, and actually interviewed her grandson, who told me all the many stories that I had already found, but he was telling me the stories she told him. So it's a really fun, my world is really fun because there's a lot of research, there's a lot of fun traveling, you meet a lot of great people, and then I get to work with museums and TV shows. So.
It's interesting, and maybe I'm picking up the wrong angle of what you're talking about here, but do you think that what was being talked about here a little bit, that it might be your subconscious kind of guiding that planchette a little bit if she's not directly thinking Ouija, but maybe it might have been back there a little bit that creates that message? Am I off by thinking that?
No, scientists, by 1850, 2 years after the modern spiritualist movement explodes in the United States, scientists across the world were laughing because they saw table tipping, table turning, spirit trumpets, any of these different devices as just expressions of your subconscious. In fact, that's where we first hear the term ideomotor response. And that's, ideomotor response is your subconscious wants to come out. And when your conscious is in a certain place, it opens that door. And so in the Ouija board, your hands are made of muscles. They want to move. If you just put your hand up and you look at it, it kind of, some people shake a little more than others. But because you want the board to work, this is what scientists believe, because you want it to work, your brain moves your hand without you knowing it. So it's a giant kind of trick. And, when you ask questions, again, your brain wants to answer them, so it does. When you play with other people, sometimes you notice how jerky the planchette moves at first. It's really hard to get going. And scientists will say, well, that's because the subconscious are fighting. And until one is the leader and the others become the followers, that's when the messages become smooth. And then you have psychics and mediums who believe that what's happening is that there's some kind of telepathic link that's being made, and that you're starting to read each other's minds, and that's where the answers are coming from. And then, of course, there's a big part of the population that believes that you are parting the veil and opening the door to the other side and speaking to something other than you or anyone who's in the room.
Do you have a belief on who you're communicating with when you use one?
I've sat through thousands of Ouija board sessions, with lots of people, with a few people, parties, conventions, wherever. And I'm a huge skeptic, right? And as a historian, you just have to be. I don't, even when I tell these stories, how the Ouija board got its name, that's according to those present. I wasn't there. I don't know if what they're telling is true, but this is what we found that they're saying. So I've seen experiences that are clearly people's subconscious. I have seen things that really do seem like there's some weird telepathic thing happening. And then I've seen things I can't explain. And so I don't necessarily think the Ouija board has to work one particular way all the time. And I think it really depends on who's there, who's playing. For people who want to try a talking board, I would tell them that the more people they play with in the beginning, the better it will work. So if you can get like 3 to 5 people going, the board will work faster. If you're just trying it by yourself for the very first time, it's not going to go. It's hard for us to let control go. And so, when I do the Ouija board with people, there's always someone who's pushing down so hard it feels like the planchette's going to break the board. And I tell them all the time, it won't work if you do that. You really do have to let the spirit move you. You have to just let it go. And so I've never had an experience that has proven to me that I'm definitely speaking to the other side, but I've had enough fun, weird, interesting experiences that keep me doing it.
I find it very,
like every ghost hunter.
Oh, absolutely. And I do find it very interesting that, the story of the Ouija board, as far as what we know, especially with that term Ouija, goes back to the 1800s, where I would have expected, and I think a lot of people would, that it goes back a lot longer. And, the idea that, do you ever think that there's a possibility that this, based on kind of that idea of how it was named, that it could possibly go back to, in some form, even back to Egyptian times or anything like that?
Well, oracles have always been, in Greek times, the Oracle of Delphi. I think talking to the dead and wanting to part the veil, that's as old as mankind. The first day that people understood that people died and didn't come back, people wanted to know where they went. And the Ouija board, you have to put it in its time. So in the Victorian times, the Ouija board not only broke a lot of rules, but it's coming off of the Civil War, where there was massive death in the country.
Yeah.
Everyone lost a father, a son, a cousin, a grandfather, a nephew. And these people didn't just die, but they didn't come back, and no one knew what happened to them. And so people turn to spirit communication tools in this time and talking boards to answer questions that nothing else could. And that's very human. Like the Ouija board is really an expression. It's a huge mirror. And it really shows us how comfortable we are with death. So in a time where a mother might have 12 children and 6 of them die, and they dress up these dead children with their live children to take one last family photo, and that goes up on the wall, your life is different. You lose more than you have. Death is ever present. So the idea of talking to the dead is completely natural. Why wouldn't you? If you're losing people all the time, when the lights go down and, there's no internet, what are you going to do? And whether you think it's true or not, it's passing the time. Ouija, again, was sold as a parlor amusement, clearly born out of the spiritualist movement, but made for mainstream. And so, it's an interesting thing. And then the Ouija board does something that kind of games didn't allow, which is you're supposed to put the Ouija board originally on your lap. Your knees are touching. Your fingers are touching on the planchette. You're supposed to do it like with candlelight. And you do it at night. Well, this is like the perfect date game. So, guys who don't care anything about the spirit world are happy to play the Ouija board with women because they get to break all these rules. And so the Ouija board really plays into lots of different things, but it really reflects how comfortable we are with death. Today, I would argue that we are very uncomfortable with death because death is so far away from us. We live much longer. We don't even want to look old. We dye our hair. We have plastic surgery. We're living forever, so much longer. And so we are very uncomfortable with death, which makes the Ouija board very scary. The Ouija board always had its critics, but it wasn't always generally to the general public looked at as evil. For a long time, it was just another game like Monopoly you had inside your closet. But eventually the pendulum swung, and thanks to Hollywood and other people's experiences and how the news likes to pick up only on the bad stuff, the Ouija board switched and became like this kind of demonic doorway.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of wonder a little bit, going back to the 1800s, hypothetically, that you mentioned like a parlor game or whatever, if say that it wasn't a Ouija board, but just silly speaking, like the Magic 8 Ball or something, if that was around at that point, was it just it was just a matter of the right thing at the right time, to your point, if in the Civil War, after it's done, people are wondering, can I talk to my loved ones? And there's so many that have died during that, like whatever it would take to be able to possibly get some kind of conclusion. Was it just a matter of putting anything in its place that might have really taken off?
Yeah, there have been many other, spirit communication devices before, but Ouija just met this kind of really interesting time in America where manufacturing really took off, industrialization. So being able to like mass produce something, before planchettes and things, they were all handmade and they were sold in bookstores. Well, suddenly we're starting to have real stores, and we're having catalogs that you can order from, and people are having money. People are doing better, and so they have more money to spend on things, and that all of those things put together really let the Ouija board take off. And just to put it into like a number perspective, Elijah Bond and Charles Kennard, who first start making the board that would become Ouija, they start with making these boards in this office that they're sharing. One's a lawyer and one is a real estate guy. And, within 2 to 3 years, there's 2 factories in Baltimore, 2 factories in New York, 2 factories in Chicago, and a factory in London. So, this explodes. This turns into huge because people also are going from a time when you can make something yourself, and that's just as good, to the good old manufacturing and marketing of a brand name. So Ouija became a brand. And so you could make these yourself. In fact, those original 1886 articles tell you exactly how to make it yourself. And that's how talking boards were made before. But Ouija had a story. Ouija had to be proven at the patent office. Ouija got its name. So all of these things made Ouija something you'd want, like a pair of Nikes or a certain kind of Lucky Jeans. They became the thing that was cool that you'd want. The reason the fad never went away or never died is because people are still dying. And think about why anyone turns to spirit communication, period. And just make it personal. What if you really want to know what's going to happen to you? You're really scared. Yeah. What's going to happen to me? Or you're worried about your loved ones. What's happened to the people I love who've crossed over? Or what if the last thing you said to someone was something horrible? You got into a terrible fight. You called them all kinds of names. They walked outside and got hit by a bus. And you are just overcome with guilt. Oh, my God, the last thing I said. I never got to tell someone how I felt. What if for 1995 it really works? And that's why. Because belief is so important to this. If you don't believe in spirit communication, if you don't believe in ghosts, if you don't believe in the paranormal, guess what? You never have these experiences. Yeah. They're just like, yeah, right, the door closed. Yeah, it's an old house. I heard a noise. If you believe, then that's really what you're opening up. So the Ouija board is different than any other spirit communication tool that's come and gone since, because we give it a lot of power. We give it power. We don't give anything else. So how many people have a kind of a bad session with their K2 meter and are like, oh my God, I have to get this K2 meter out of my house. It's terrible. But with a Ouija board, you have a bad experience with it, and it's the board. You need to get the board out of the house. The board is the portal. And I think people really forget it's just the telephone that you happen to be using to try to conjure something. You don't need a Ouija board. You know, there are psychics and mediums who believe that they can talk to the dead without any tool. You can use anything, a flashlight. You know, the Ouija board, it's just that it's been around for 125 years. And because you touch it, and because you hear it, and because you see it, you are a part of the communication. Whereas technology makes us feel safer, right? Like I can put the K2 meter down. I can put the ghost box down. I can put the flashlight down and walk away and still ask those questions. But the funny thing is, if there's some kind of thing in the room that can make a flashlight blink or your K2 meter go off or leave you an EVP, why do you not believe that this thing can pick it up and chuck it at your head? Like, I don't believe personally, I just don't believe that there's a, rule book that says, oh, you can talk to me through K2 meters, you can use an EVP recorder, but if you use a Ouija board, I gotcha. The difference is if you believe that's true, then you have given your power over to something else, and that's where it gets dangerous. Because in your mind, people look at the Ouija board as something different, and as soon as you do, you're opening up a different door.
I think you're bringing up some amazing points. I really do, and these are things I want to talk about. And to me, a couple things. First of all, when it comes to a Ouija board, when people are using it, I wonder if some of the interest in using it, like for just the general public, especially when you are sharing the experience with somebody, part of the fun is that mystery of, are they moving it, or is it really something more paranormal moving it? Because you don't really know. You're going to ask your friend, like, are you moving this? And of course they're going to say no, and there's that little back and forth. But also, this is the thing that that is interesting about Ouija boards to me, and correct me if you think I'm off base here. The idea is that, I think a lot of people ask you, and certainly a lot of people ask me all the time, are Ouija boards dangerous? Are spirit boxes dangerous? And my answer to that is I think both of those could be dangerous. The difference for me personally is I can't walk into Target and pick up a spirit box, where I can walk into Target and I can get a Ouija board. And I personally believe that if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, if it's marketed as something that's just like, hey, it's just a fun game. You don't know if you're going to get a spirit or not. But the thing is I've when we get back from our break in a little bit, I want to run something past you that sometimes people don't know what they're going to actually be getting off of it. And I think that, to me, that's where it's a possibility of being dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had many long conversations with Lorraine Warren. I'm sure your listeners know who she is. She pretty much needs no introduction. And I did a 6-hour interview with her, basically on the Ouija board. And even though we've known each other a long time, she doesn't like the fact that I love Ouija boards. But we kind of agree, which is, there's no difference with the Ouija board as to anything else. Any form of spirit communication is potentially dangerous because you're conjuring something. Even if the door you're opening up is to your subconscious, you don't know what's back there. Your brain is and your mind is an incredibly fascinating thing. And it creates all kinds of walls and things to keep you okay. When you bring that wall down, just from a scientific point, that can also be scary because you don't know what your brain is trying to tell you in a way that, it's not just like coming to you in your brain. It's going to play out through some kind of entity. And again, when you play the Ouija board, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know, when you say, is anyone here, you don't really know who's going to answer. However, what I tell people is that's no different than hopping on the train, on the subway, and turning to the person next to you and being like, hey, how's it going? I mean, I talk to strangers all the time. When they get weird and strange and make me feel uncomfortable, I just, move and end the conversation. And for people who play the Ouija board, remember, there's a hang-up button right at the bottom. It's built in. It says goodbye. It's all you. The portal you're opening up is inside of you.
Yeah.
You're doing the communicating. And so again, if you look at the board as just the tool that you're using, when you're done, you're done. If you believe, like you can see in so many movies, and some of them I've even consulted on, if you believe that once the door is open, it can't be closed, again, it can get scary. But no more scarier to me than anything else. I mean, I'm just as freaked out when someone can get a flashlight to blink to answer consistently as I am with the Ouija board. It's like, what the heck is going on? And that's the beauty of it. You know, and again, so the Ouija board lets you explore death. It lets you explore your beliefs and whether you believe your friends are pushing it. Are the spirits coming through you? Are they just guiding your hands? Is this just your subconscious? That's the beauty of it. You know, this mystery of the Ouija board, the real question isn't, can you talk to the dead through the Ouija board? The real question is, can you talk to the dead? Because if you can talk to the dead, then why wouldn't the Ouija board work?
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes sense. But the real question is, can you? And so, you know, that's why talking boards and Ouija boards are still so popular, because as long as people are dying, people are going to want to reach out.
Before we go to the break, and we're going to do that in a couple of minutes, but before we go to break, I do want to ask, because I have never bought one from a store, and actually I don't own a Ouija board. Is there any, do you know, because I know that you've consulted to Hasbro, if I'm not mistaken, is there any warning on a Ouija board about the possible implications of using it?
Well, there's always been, when Parker Brothers bought the Ouija board in 1966 from the Fold family, their tagline really started to come out, "It's just a game, isn't it?" And they would market it as like, you know, when they got it in 66 and especially through the 70s, you know, the New Age movement had really taken hold. And so like vibrations and, you know, lots of, you know, things about like astrology. And so there were all kinds of stuff that was going on. And they really played it as it's a mystery. Like, you know, this mystery has been going on for a while. What makes the Ouija board work? What happened in 2014 when they came out with their new board and the movie, that changed from "it's just a game, isn't it?" to the very first thing you see inside when you took out the board would be all of these what we call Ouija stitions, or the beliefs and the rules of the board that have come up over the years. And the very first one says, "Do not play the Ouija board if you believe it's just a game." So Hasbro itself decided to, as they were making a game, that, you know, as they were making a movie that basically said, you know, it was never just a game. They added that into it. And you know, I can't speak for Hasbro or anyone who makes the Ouija board, but the people who are making Ouija boards today, it's, you know, it's sold in toy stores. It is meant to be an amusement. What people do with it, you know, is kind of how and what they do with it is their own business. You know, it's kind of like a gun, right? Like if you buy a gun and you're really like good with it, and you know, you keep it in a good place, and you know, you don't let anyone play with it that's not supposed to be playing with it. A gun is just a gun. But if you know, take a gun and wave it around and leave the bullets in it, and someone picks it up and shoots someone, well, it's a bad thing. So I think, you know, how people who are making them think it's really up to the user. It's really intent. It's really what you're trying to do. And so, you know, like that's kind of the take, I think, manufacturers take on it. But I think most people, it's because the Ouija board is often people's first on-purpose experience with the paranormal, meaning like when you're a kid, you hear things and you see things and you might get scared. But the Ouija board in our day is kind of like a rite of passage. You know, you're at a slumber party, you're at a party, someone pulls it out. It's the first time you are on purpose trying to make contact. And that can be a pretty scary, impactful thing. And with the Ouija board, kind of what's neat about it is the scariest things about the Ouija board don't happen when you're playing. Like, think about it. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? The Ouija board's going to call you names. It's going to, okay, I hear that every day. You know, like people call me all kinds of things. And like, that's no scarier to me. What happens with the Ouija board, all the lights go out or you hear a bang. What happens afterwards, because you believe you've made contact, you start connecting dots. You start to hear things that may have already been always happening that you never noticed. But the Ouija board is weaving a narrative. Now that you've opened the door, you hear things, you see things, and it always comes back to, oh my God, we played the Ouija board, and now all this weird stuff is happening.
Yeah.
So again, we give the Ouija board power.
Yeah.
So the Ouija board is unlike any other thing. So I don't want to say to people, it's exactly the same thing as a ghost box. It's not, but only because we don't believe it is. If you can wrap your mind around these are all just tools and none of them have any power that we're not giving to them, then it's fine. But the minute you start to believe that the Ouija board is different, that this thing is where the power is coming from, you've forgotten about you and your control and you being part of the conversation.
So we have a lot of things coming into the chat room. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to take a break so that we can finish this hour with there. I think there's a lot to talk about. We've just really scratched the surface. So what we're going to do after the break, we're going to continue talking to Robert Murch. We're going to talk more about some of the stuff that people are talking about in the chat room. I want to talk about Zozo. I want to talk about a couple other things, and I think we're going to run out of time very quickly, so we're going to get through this as quickly as I can. You are listening to Minnesota Ghost Box on the After Hours feed on iHeartRadio and the Pair X Radio Network. And welcome back to Minnesota Ghost Box, doing some live streaming on Pair X Radio and available on the After Hours feed on iHeartRadio. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we are talking to Robert Murch, who is an expert on the Ouija boards. We've been talking for the last half hour about a lot of things. We're just scratching the surface. We're going to get to a lot of chat room chatter, if you will, and I have a lot more questions coming up. And so we have a lot to get through. But before that, I wanted to quickly go through a couple pieces of housekeeping before we get back to Murch and talk more about all things Ouija boards. First of all, I've been droning on for a very long time about our web series and the Soap Factory and all that good stuff. Let me tell you that web series is out. It's available for people to watch. The Minnesota Ghost Box web series, the first part of the Soap Factory, is available for people to take a look at. We put a lot of work into it, and we are very happy with it. So far, over 7,000 people have taken a look at this, and we are very excited with all the wonderful comments. Please take a look at it. That place is seriously haunted. There's a lot of cool things going on there. It's not demons. It's good stuff there. We want you to take a look if you have a chance. It's available on our YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/MNGhostBoxOfficial. And while you're there, please consider subscribing to us. You can also like us on our Facebook page. We're at www.facebook.com/MNGhostBox. And you can follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @MNGhostBox. Also, you can get a hold of us through our website, where you could take a look at our web series there, some articles. You could also listen to past episodes. That is at www.mn-ghostbox.org. I also have a lot of my spirit box evidence up there, too, if you'd like to take a listen. We're very happy with how all that is shaping up and stuff, so please take a look if you have a chance. Now, if you want to know more about what Murch is up to, and I do highly recommend this, there is a ton of information out there that he has put together. Let me tell you, you can go to www.robertmurch, that's MURCH.com. And you can also go to www.tbhs.org, and finally www.williamfuld, so that's WILLIAMFULD.com. And there's a lot of information at all those locations. I'm going to put that up later on my Facebook page. If you want to check those out, I highly recommend it. And his Facebook page is www.facebook.com /talking boards. I do want to let you know that Murch has done a ton of consulting on programs with other companies. All that stuff is available. If by chance we don't get to that tonight, which I really want to, there is a ton of information out there of all the places of where he's spoken and consulted with, and it's honestly, Murch, this is really fascinating, and there's just so many layers to this. Before, one last thing, real fast. I will be back in a couple weeks, and I think that we're planning on a Bigfoot episode. So once we have more information on that, we're going to pass that along. But right now, I want to get back to Murch. There's a lot more that we need to talk about. How are you having? Are you having fun?
I'm having a blast. This is awesome.
That's great. I'm having a blast. I'm having a lot of people on the chat room who is joining in. Which is always fun, and I always say that this is the best chat room in radio, and I do mean that. I have a mention from a man named Swanee, who says, I was at a hotel a few weeks ago. They mentioned in their guest folder in each room that Ouija boards were forbidden. They're not allowed at all. And I do know the hotel he's talking about. It's a very well-known hotel that actually caters to paranormal investigations, and they will not allow Ouija boards at all.
Yeah, it happens. There's actually, I think it was a few years ago, someone posted, Subway put a sign up saying Ouija boards are not welcome. So
that's right.
There are places that this happens to. There were a lot of like the Ohio Reformatory, they did not, I don't know if they do anymore, they did not allow Ouija boards. Actually had to get special permission in order to do it with the Ghost Adventures crew. When I was speaking at one of their conventions and we had everyone playing the Ouija board, there were like really strict rules as to how we could do it and how we had to stay in the room and make sure we were with them and nothing bad was going to happen. And so the Ouija board has a stigma, and it certainly has a reputation to uphold. You know, again, the reason why the Ouija board is still so popular is because it is potentially scary. I mean, why do kids do anything? You know, because it might be scary.
Absolutely. Now, another side to it, which I really like, Nicole had said, based on your explanation of the use of giving power to the Ouija board and all that, she mentions, and I thought this was pretty good, and of course, as soon as I looked for it, I lost it. Give me 1 second here. This is classic. The intention of the collective consciousness. Yes, perfect explanation, Murch. I mean, it's people get it. People get where you're coming from in terms of the use of the Ouija board and also the power that you can give it yourself.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and again, I think people forget, and you should always remember this. I'm sure your listeners also noted Jeff Belanger. He's a good friend of mine, and the funny thing is we both lived in Massachusetts, and though we only lived maybe 30 minutes away from each other, maybe 35 minutes in traffic, I think we only saw each other in our home state 3 times out of all the years I lived there. I always saw him at conventions, and we went to Australia together and do kind of fun stuff. But he really, remembers like the early days of this when I wasn't allowed to, really go to conventions because people were that upset about Ouija boards. Like the Beyond Reality events actually all those years ago for the Ghost Hunters gave me my first break. I got to speak at one of their conventions at Mount Washington Resort in New Hampshire, and I was allowed to come, but I couldn't stay. It was like, sorry, like this upsets people. You can come talk. The next year I could bring old Ouija boards, and that freaked everyone out, but we couldn't bring Ouija boards to play until finally Hasbro had sent me with like cases of them, and we literally had everyone playing with them. But it took a lot of convincing Jason and Grant that this was not going to end in a disaster. But we were sitting there, and Jason was leading one of the ghost hunts, and he's got his K2 meter out, and he's asking, is there anyone there? Do you have any messages for us? And Jeff hits me, and it's like, isn't this a Ouija board session? Like, we just got balled out. We can't use Ouija boards, but what's the difference? And so I think this is kind of many years ago now, but it was the beginning of the turn, I think, in the paranormal world even though there's still a stigma and there's a large population that doesn't want to have anything to do with it, it is much more accepted today. I mean, spiritualists, they're the relatives of today's ghost hunters. And in their day, the Ouija board was just one of the tools they used. Today, it's kind of shunned by the very group it came from. And there's kind of a reason for that, which is a little interesting. So think about it. Before the Ouija board, there were some other spirit communication tools. They didn't take off and they weren't able to manufacture them the way that the Ouija board could be manufactured. So they didn't explode the same way. They were still popular, just not the same numbers. Mm-hmm. And imagine who that hurt. So think about it. Suddenly, at one time, you were paying mediums and psychics to, have a seance and get in touch with your loved ones. And suddenly, for $1, $1.50, you could do this in your own home as many times as you wanted. So who do you think was immediately hurt by the Ouija explosion?
Right. I mean, it's going to be those mediums and whatnot.
Exactly. And so we have real early stories where even though they were the ones who started using talking boards and they were doing this whole thing, suddenly when it starts to cut into their bottom line, we start to see these articles where famous psychics and mediums are saying, Ouija boards are dangerous. You don't know who you're talking to. You need someone like me who's experienced to take you through this unseen land. And that has really stayed today, even though that sentence was born out of money than it was actual, what they were afraid of, it was going to put them out of business, not they were afraid that you were going to get in trouble with it. But that has really stayed in people's psyche. And again, it's because you really don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, anyone who has kids or has helped someone drive. When I learned to drive, it wasn't very scary because I was the one driving. But the poor people who were in the car with me, when I was, hitting the brake and, trying to shift gears and, I'm sure they were terrified. So when you're learning to do anything, it's scary and you can have bad experiences with it. But, with the Ouija board, if you had a bad EVP session, it doesn't stop too many people from doing it. But if you have a bad Ouija board session, it's like, get that thing out of the house. I don't ever want to use it again. Get it away from me. And so, again, it's that the Ouija board just isn't in the same class because we do look at it differently, and that's what makes it different.
It's interesting, and a number of things that are interesting about what you're saying there. One of them, too, is the idea that you can make a Ouija board yourself. I mean, it isn't blessed. There isn't any power over it. I mean, it's a piece of paper. You're putting the alphabet on. You're putting a couple other things on. You can get, as long as you have a planchette. I mean, I can't make a spirit box. I mean, I could find a radio. I can hack it, but I couldn't build it from ground up. I mean, there's something very simplistic about a Ouija board.
Absolutely. And I think that's, again, there's nothing mystical or magical about cardboard and plastic, and that's what the Ouija board is made out of today, right? Like, it's the power you give it. It's because you believe. And belief is 9/10 of your reality. If you believe things are true, they are true. So when people tell me their experiences with the Ouija board, they're not lying. They believe what they've seen. They believe what they've heard. They believe the experience that's happened to them. It's just that, is it a spirit that's doing it or some demonic force, or is it their subconscious? And all of those things are equally real. Like, none of that's, I can't tell you what you experience isn't real. I mean, that would be ridiculous. But again, if someone who's sitting in the same room, it's kind of like blindfold someone, turn off someone's hearing, and and make it so they can't talk. And everyone is going to experience that room differently. So when you're playing the Ouija board, the true believer is going to get one thing out of it. The person who's like, well, maybe it'll work, and then the person who's like, okay, this is just crap, and I'm just going to push this thing to scare the heck out of everybody. Like, that's, the general group of people that are playing it. And, what happens, what's fun about the Ouija board, unlike any other device, is that when you ask a question and it starts to move, even the person who thinks it's bull is suddenly like petrified because it starts to move, and you immediately look around and say, are you pushing that? Because I'm not doing this. And so all of a sudden it gets very quiet. It's very eerie. It's very intimate. The Ouija board, when you use the Ouija board, you are part of the communication, so you are involved in it. It's not like an EVP recorder where maybe you didn't hear anything and you have to go back and listen to it. Like, it's happening right now with you. And that's more intense than just, asking questions and then having to go back to your room and being super excited when you hear something, but you didn't hear it necessarily when it happened. With the Ouija board, it's happening right now. And so that's a really cool, the sliding, the sound of the sliding across it, the looking at each other like, is it you? Is it you? And then, wanting to know, okay, did whatever it tell us, was it true? And for people who want to play, I'll tell you another piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thinks they know what they want to ask until it starts moving. And then literally your brain goes blank. I see it happen all the time. So if you're going to play the Ouija board and you have a few friends you want to do it with, come up with like 10 questions you write down on a piece of paper